All right, welcome back to Prayer of the Barren Womb. We are in part 29 of the Four Rivers of Eden. In my last video, we discussed Genesis chapter 14, which is the battle of the 9 kings. The 4 victorious kings capture Lot, take him captive. Abram musters a tiny band of men, 318 on four victorious kings. Seems like pretty good odds to me. And I have been developing throughout the story of Abram and Lot this focus of eyes versus ears, how the eyes of our spirit are actually our ears. And so I think what we're seeing in Genesis chapter 4 is the outworking. Abram is actually preaching to us on what it looks like to walk by faith and not by sight. What would empower a man to go after his nephew with 318 guys on 4 victorious kings? What would the ratio have been? Hundreds to one? Can only imagine. But what would allow a man to have the courage to take on this, this desperate plan? And I believe it's simply faith. Faith is what allowed Abram to plan this battle and to rescue his nephew. And it would be faith that God had made promises. The creator of heaven and earth had made promises to him, and he was holding those promises true. He believed God. He believed God was going to make his name great, was going to make him to become a nation, was going to give him land. And so he knew he was going to come back from this battle with his nephew. And even though the scripture emphasizes the brother relationship between Abram and Lot, I think that there's maybe still a slight question mark in Abram's mind. Maybe Lot is the guy. And so he goes after him. There's a double motive in Abram going after Lot to rescue him. One, he does value his brother. His brother's interests are his own. And this answers Cain's question of Genesis 4. Am I my brother's keeper? Abram is answering this question in the affirmative. Yes, my brother's interests are my own. I will not leave my brother in captivity to heathens and who knows what horror. So he goes and he rescues Lot, but I think there may be an additional motive. Maybe there's just the possibility in the back of Abram's mind that Lot might still be the guy. Maybe he's not only rescuing his brother, maybe he's rescuing his inheritor. And so when Lot leaves him for a second time, just the dejection and the deflation that must have been in Abram's soul. I mean, you can just feel it. It's like, head hung, it's like, dude, Lot, seriously? You're going back to Sodom? This king of incredible wickedness? You're going back with them? I think Abram's passing another test. For the second time, he is relinquishing Lot to his own choices. Maybe Abram was ready to take up a paddle on this kid's backside. What are you thinking going back to Sodom? No, grab him by the ear and yank him out of there. You're coming with me, you idiot kid. But he doesn't. For the second time, he relinquishes Lot. He has enough respect for Lot's free will to allow Lot to choose the king of Sodom over his uncle. And you can just feel the heartache in Abram. So that just the sorrow that must have just enveloped him. And Yahovah appears for a second time now, or not a second time, but he appears again on the heels of Lot leaving Abram and comforts Abram. You can hear the comfort in the words of Yahovah to Abram when he says, "Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward." And you can imagine the frustration that's still in Abram. It's like, but God, Lord, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? The heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And God doesn't answer him. It's just crickets, just silence. And Abram asks for a second time. Then Abram said, look, you've given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And God finally answers, and he says, the word of the Lord, the word of Yahovah came to him saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body will be your heir. And then he brought him outside and said, look now towards heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. So this is the second time that God comes to Abram and promises him. The first time, God promises Abram descendants as the sand of the sea, as dust of the earth. And this second promise speaks to stars of the heavens, dust of the earth and stars of the heavens. It seems that the children of Abram are going to occupy both realms, the earthly realm, the natural realm, as well as the heavenly realm. And we come to the very core of the gospel in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. And we read there, and he believed Yahovah, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. This verse becomes the very core of Paul's theology. But this, I believe, to be Abram actually walking in the pattern of Adam. This is nothing new. This isn't like Abram started this faith walk. I believe that the original template and he believed God and credited it to him as righteousness begins in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20, where we find Adam naming his wife for the second time, and he names her the mother of all living. And yes, she will be in a dust of the earth sense. Eve is obviously the mother of all living. She will become the mother of all humanity who has ever lived, come from Adam and Eve, from that union. And in a dust of the earth way of understanding this, she is the mother of all living. But she has just introduced spiritual death to the material realm, to humanity. And I believe that there's a second level of understanding when Adam names Eve, Chava, the mother of all living. I believe that there's a meta level here as well, where he believes God. In Genesis chapter 3, where God is cursing each one of the participants in the rebellion, he's cursing the serpent, and he says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So Adam, listening to this, is believing God, and the faith in Adam's heart to believe God allows him to name the woman who has just introduced death into the human realm. He names her the mother of all living. He names her Chava, because he knows, he believes God, he heard the promise of God, he believed the promise of God, he took action upon the promise of God, and he names his wife the mother of all living. Not only all those who will live in the body, but all those who will live in eternity, in the eternal state. Not only those who will live as dust of the earth, but those who will live in an additional layer of life as stars of the heavens. And so he believed God, and it was credited to Adam. Adam is the original template of walking by faith and not by sight. He believed God that there would come a redeemer of the seed of his wife who would reverse the curse, who would defeat the enemy, who would undo the wreckage and the damage and the destruction and the horror that he and his wife had released into the human realm. So Abram is walking in the pattern, in the template of his first father, Adam, when he believed the Lord and accounted it to him as righteousness. Abram is in this context of like, okay, I don't know how my wife is barren. I'm an old man, but if you say that seed is going to come of my body, that my heir is going to come from me, then I believe you. I don't know how it could possibly happen. but confirm this. And he says, well, how shall I know? Beginning in verse 7. And then he, speaking of Yahovah, said to him, speaking of Abram, I am Yahovah who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land and to inherit it. And he said, Adonai Elohim, how shall I know that I will inherit? So he, Adonai Elohim, said to him, Abram, bring me a 3-year-old heifer. This is a female offering. A 3-year-old female goat, once again, female. A 3-year-old ram, male. A turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all of these to him and cut them in two down the middle and placed each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. And we're about to get to the section of Scripture that speaks of this very unique word. And I've mentioned it several times in this series so far. If you've listened and if you're still with me up to this point, you've heard me talk about the tardema. One of the themes I've been developing in this idea of the 4 rivers of Eden is how often the Scripture will echo itself. And we saw that in the creation week of the 7 days of creation being echoed again in the recreation event of Noah. You have each one of these days being repeated in the events of the flood. So we're intended to understand that the flood is a recreation event and Noah is a second Adam. And so I've been bringing this theme forward in the idea of how Abram is the third Adam, because it happens on the heels of a worldwide destruction event. Every time you see a worldwide destruction event, you need a river of life. So I've been developing this theme. And what we're seeing in Abram is pattern after pattern that walks just in the same iterations of Adam as well as Noah. Adam and Noah, both given land and children. The promise, here, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. For Adam, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, take dominion. Abram is in a slightly different iteration of the same promises, but he's also being promised land, not the whole earth now, a sliver of land called the nation of Israel, and children. But instead of being commanded to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, Abram, a man of barrenness, is being promised. So you see the same theme of land and children coming forward, emerging up from the depths of this Mendelbrot-like Torah that we have. You see the theme of land and children emerging, but there's subtleties, there's variations, there's differences. Instead of being commanded to be fruitful and multiply, Abram is now being promised that he will acquire fruitfulness and being given a land. So there's subtleties and there's differences in Abram, but you can still see iteration after iteration. We saw him being brought into the land in a condition of barrenness. We're looking right now at the loneliness. And so we're seeing all these shadows and echoes emerging again and again in the life of Abram to testify to us that we are looking at the third river of life. The difference being that, and this is hot off the presses, I just saw this and I did not know I was going to go here right now, but the first two, in Genesis chapter 7, we're given these 4 accounts of the flood. In 2 accounts, the ark is being carried aloft and lifted upon the surface of the waters. In the last 2 accounts, we're not told about an ark. And what this suggests to me is that in these first 2 accounts, life was being preserved and being lifted above. We're no longer in an extinction level event type judgment. Now, the ark is going to be more of a submarine, if you will, if you want to think of it in that aspect, where the submarine of life, instead of being an ark, the path, the river of life is now submerged within the seas of humanity. I don't know if that makes any sense, but Abram's subtly different. I still have to develop that thought a little bit more. But Abram, if all that stuff wasn't in place, and if all we had was the tardema, it would be enough for us to establish Abram as the third river of life. And this is because the scriptures offer us diagnostic tools that were written within itself to explain itself. And this is so profound. Once you begin to understand that the scripture gives you diagnostic tools to be able to interpret itself, it's kind of like a fantastic, I think of this in terms of the genetic code, the book of life that each one of us have written within every cell of our body is this fantastic double helix spiral of the genetic molecule. But what is interesting about this molecule, that's, if you were to unwind a molecule of DNA, it's said that they would be like some 10 to 12 feet long if you were to take every bond and stretch them out. So skinny that light can't bounce off it, but if you were to somehow sustain that molecule without breaking a single link, it would be like 10 to 12 feet. It would be like, the length of the room I'm sitting in, a single molecule. And what that molecule is a library of information, thousands and thousands of books of information. One book, you pull one book off the shelf and it has to do with the color of your eyes. You pull another book off the shelf and it has to do with your skeletal structure. You pull another book off the shelf and it has to do with hair color, skin color, whatever. So written within the library of this DNA molecule is book after book after book. But here's what's interesting about this. In order to extract the information from the genetic molecule, the DNA molecule, there's a book written within the DNA molecule that codes for an unzipping machine. Because you can't just like grab the genetic molecule and start tearing it apart and look for these little pamphlets on eye color. You need an exquisite little machine that unzips the DNA molecule, and it cuts little segments. It cuts each book out of the molecule, pulls that little part of information out, and then you can encode for all these cellular functions. So this is a chicken and the egg, isn't it? The only way to extract information from the genetic molecule is this little zipper machine. But how are you going to get to the information in the DNA molecule if you haven't first unzipped it? So to me, this screams at us, God created you. God created us. We are created beings in image and likeness. This screams to us. And why there's even such a thing as atheism right now, I can't imagine it. But anyhow, the Bible does the same thing. The Bible gives us little unzipping machines so that we can extract information out of it. And one of the unzipping machines, and we've talked about several so far, but one of the unzipping machines is when you have a very unique word that's only used twice in the entire Torah, and it's this tardema. Understanding that now, understanding that what we are being given with exclusivity of certain words is the Bible is testifying to us that when you see tardema here in Genesis chapter 2 and you see tardema here in Genesis chapter 15, this is the scripture. The author with a capital A is screaming at us. These two stories are parallel and we're to understand them in light of each other. Let me give you an example of the meanings of this. Our Jewish brethren, Southern House, don't have the same understanding as the Gentile church for the rib, the story of the rib of Adam, that Eve was taken from Adam's side, and we interpret that word in our English Bibles as rib, that Eve was actually built out of Adam's rib. Our Jewish brethren of Southern House have a different understanding of that and what they believe, and it's not like this is, fall on your sword doctrine. I go with them on this, but what they believe is that Adam was actually split right down the middle, and that Eve was built out of one of Adam's sides, that he was reconstructed as male, she was constructed and built up as female, and these two halves that previously were echad, these two halves of Adam were brought together to be made echad, one. Okay, I'm going to go with the Southern House understanding of this. Why would they think that Adam was split right down the middle? It's because of the interpretive tool of unique words indicate to us that these two stories are together. They are echad. The tardema of Abram and the tardema of Adam are echad. These two stories make up two halves of the same story. So if you see male and female sacrifice being split right down the middle in Abram's tardema, and we haven't actually gotten to the tardema yet, then the inference to Adam's tardema is that he was split right down the middle to form male and female. Does that make sense? And so this, I'm not going to come dogmatically down. Was it a rib or was Adam split in half? I'll tell you what side I'm going to, let's say, the classic setup. I'm standing at the pearly gates and St. Peter is going, hey, Jim, you've done pretty good so far, but we have one final question for you before I allow you entrance. Was Eve built out of a rib, or was Eve built out of the split sides of this being formerly known as Adam? I'm going to go with Southern House. I'm going to go with, we'll see when we get there. But I believe this interpretive tool is very important for us to begin to recover what the scriptures are telling us. And so this uniqueness of tardema, Adam's storyline, is to be understood in light of Abram's storyline and vice versa. So we get this very strange sacrifice of male and female animals being cut right down. The day 6 animals are split right down the middle. Day 5 animals are not split. I don't know if that has additional meaning, but you can see the difference here. You've got the heifer, the female goat, and the ram. These are all day 6 sacrificial offerings. The birds are day 5 beings. I don't know what to make of that. It's just data that needs interpretation. You guys can take the ball and run with it if you want. But this is a very important understanding for us. And let's move forward again. I'm going a little bit long on this teaching, but I do want to try and get through Genesis chapter 15, picking up in verse 12. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep, there's our word, dun, 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 the tardema. Now, when the sun was going down, a tardema fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a strange land that is not theirs, and they will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possession. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it shall come to pass, and it came to pass, when the sun went down, and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On the same day, Yahovah made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river of Euphrates. And then we have a list of the inhabitants of the land that actually belongs. God is giving a land grant to Abram, and the present occupants of this land are the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites. Okay, let's cut it off right there for right now, but I want to develop a little bit further this horror and great darkness, this dread that fell upon Abram. One, what does that suggest about Adam's tardema? Don't know, haven't heard anything on it. Anyhow, that would be speculative. But the horror, Abram was given this prophetic vision, this nightmare, this horror and dread fell upon him. And I believe, here's my supposition, that Abram was given a prophetic vision of what would happen to his own children. These are his children that he's looking at. His children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, his great-great-children. I believe Abram was given a vision of what would happen downstream to his own bloodline, that he saw prophetically the rivalry that would take place between brothers. He saw the 10 brothers of Leah going up against the one brother of Rachel, of deceiving their father and selling their brother into bondage in Egypt, that Joseph was going to suffer terribly in Egypt, that these brothers would later be driven from the land as a result of famine and brought to Egypt, that the nation, the children of Abram, would be collected in Egypt, that they would be turned upon by the pharaohs, that at one point his own babies, Abram's own babies, are going to be thrown into the Nile and fed to the crocodiles, that the river Nile is going to run red with the blood of his children. He's going to see this. He's going to see a prophetic nightmare, horror and dread, but he's also going to see the salvation, the redemption, the lifting out of this terrible situation by the power of God, who has just walked through the pieces. Abram was asleep. He couldn't keep covenant. He was asleep. He was thrown into a prophetic darkness, and God himself walks through the pieces as a burning torch and what was it? How does it phrase? A smoking oven and a burning torch that passes between two parties. Were passing through this covenant of the pieces. And in my opinion, it's Yeshua. This is a theophany that Abram is seeing Yeshua walk through the pieces with the Father on behalf of humanity. The only begotten one of the Father, the unique person of Yeshua, is walking through this covenant of the pieces on Abram's behalf, knowing full well that Abram and his children are not going to be able to keep the covenant. They're going to break the covenant. Put that on me. Let what happens to these animals happen to me if I break covenant. And what we find out downstream is the children of Abram are going to break covenant again and again. Was Abram seeing a prophetic picture of what would happen at the base of Mount Sinai when his own children break covenant with God and worship a golden calf? Does he see the rivalry extended into the future that happens between tribe and tribe in the book of Judges? Does he see the tribes being unified under his seed, the seed of David? But once again, his children going off, a split, a divided kingdom happens. But there's always a spark. Abram always sees this one spark of light that's never extinguished. He sees the seed of David, that this light is never extinguished, and it becomes Yeshua. We don't know. We don't know how far this dread and this darkness, this horrible prophetic picture of the future, we don't know how much Abram is shown. But he awakens from this tardema. And what's the next thing he sees? Well, what's the next thing Adam sees when he awakens from his tardema? The next thing Adam sees when he awakens from his tardema is Eve. Eve is brought to him. What's the next thing that Abram sees when he awakens from his tardema? Chapter 16, verse 1. Immediately upon awakening, now Sarai, Abram's wife, We already know Sarai is Abram's wife, but the scripture, the author with a capital A, is highlighting to us the first thing that Abram sees after he awakens from this tardema is his wife, and it's Sarai. All right, let's pause here. This has gone long, and we'll come back with part 30, part 30 of the Four Rivers of Eden. I appreciate you. I so appreciate anybody who's made it this far. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in part 30.